"You can hear me, can't you?" Grace whispered, her fingers gently brushing against the stranger's motionless hand. "Sometimes I think I see your eyelids flutter when I read the good parts." The steady beep of the monitor was her only answer. 306 remained as silent as it had been for the past 3 months, save for the mechanical hum of the ventilator pumping life into the nameless man's lungs. Grace Whitmore adjusted her scrubs and settled into the worn vinyl chair beside his bed. At 42, she had spent nearly half her life at St. Joseph's Hospital in Charleston, but these midnight visits to the John Doe in room 306 had become something beyond duty. The night shift suited her, fewer people to question why she spent her breaks reading to a comatose patient with no visitors and no identity. The hospital corridors outside hummed with distant activity, but in here, time seemed suspended. The room smelled of ether and old wood, an odd combination that reminded Grace of her father's study when she was a child. Moonlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting long shadows across the man's still features. "I brought something." "Different tonight," she said, pulling a dog-eared paperback from her bag. "Jane Eyre. My mother read it to me when I was sick as a child." Grace opened to the first page, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. She had developed a ritual with this stranger, this man whose chart simply read John Doe in neat clinical handwriting. There was something about his face that seemed kind, despite the bruising that had long since faded. When she finished the first chapter, Grace set the book aside and did what no nursing manual recommended. She talked to him about her day, her life, her struggles. "Lily's not doing well," she confided, referring to her younger sister. "The fibrous tissue in her lungs is hardening faster than the doctors predicted. I'm trying everything, but the treatments are so expensive." Grace wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. "Sorry, I shouldn't burden you with this. But sometimes I think you're the only one who really listens." The weight of caring for Lily had become almost unbearable. At 19, her sister needed constant care for her cystic fibrosis, treatments, medications, and frequent hospitalizations that Grace's nurse's salary barely covered. "You know, it's strange," Grace continued, taking the man's warm hand in hers. "I feel more seen in this room, talking to you, than I do anywhere else. Is that pathetic?" She traced the lines on his palm gently, noticing the calluses that suggested he'd worked with his hands. There was no wedding ring, no identifying marks except a small, strange scar at the base of his thumb shaped like a crescent moon. "I wonder who you are," she whispered. "Who's missing you out there? Or are you like me, someone whose absence hardly creates a ripple?" The rhythmic sound of the ventilator and the soft glow of the monitors lulled Grace into a drowsy state. She hadn't slept properly in days, worry for Lily keeping her awake even during her precious few hours off. "I'll just rest my eyes for a moment," she murmured, her head drooping toward the edge of the bed. When Grace awoke, the sterile smell of hospital antiseptic had been replaced by the scent of sandalwood and sea air. The hard vinyl chair had transformed into something impossibly soft. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself lying in a canopied bed with sheets that felt like liquid silk against her skin. Sunlight streamed through tall windows that overlooked an expansive ocean view. The room around her was spacious and elegant, with antique furniture and artwork that belonged in a museum. This wasn't room 306. This wasn't St. Joseph's Hospital. Grace shot upright, heart pounding in her chest. That's when she saw him, a man sitting in a chair beside the bed, watching her with intense blue eyes that seemed startlingly familiar. The same eyes she'd been gazing into for months, willing them to open. "You stayed with me," he said, a smile spreading across his face as he leaned forward. His voice was rich and deep, with a slight raspiness, as if it hadn't been used in some time. "Now let me stay with you. Who are you?" Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched the Egyptian cotton sheets to her chest. The man's smile widened, revealing perfect teeth. "Elliot Carrington," He said the name as if it should mean something to her. Grace swallowed hard. How did I get here? Where exactly is here? My home, Elliot replied, standing from his chair. Sunlight caught the silver in his dark hair. He moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had recently relearned how to walk. And as for how, my staff brought you here at my request after you fell asleep. The name suddenly clicked into place. Carrington, as in Carrington Healthcare. Her mouth went dry. The Carrington family owned half the hospitals on the eastern seaboard, including St. Joseph's, the very same. Elliot walked to a window, his silk robe catching the breeze from the ocean beyond. Though I've been absent from operations for some time. Grace slid from the bed, relieved to find herself still in her scrubs. This is kidnapping. I need to go back. My sister. Lily is fine, Elliot said, turning to face her. I made arrangements. She's being cared for by the best specialists in my Charleston facility. Grace froze. How do you know about Lily? His expression softened. I know everything about you, Grace Whitmore. Your voice has been my companion for 3 months. He stepped closer. Your voice is the reason I came back. The morning light illuminated the spacious room, revealing details Grace had missed. Antique mahogany furniture, ancestral portraits on the walls, shelves of leather-bound books. The scent of lavender and aged paper hung in the air. Through the windows, she could see manicured gardens leading to a private beach. You heard me? While you were in the coma? It seemed impossible. Every word, Elliot confirmed. Your stories about Lily, your childhood in South Carolina, your midnight confessions. He hesitated. Your loneliness. Heat rose to Grace's cheeks. The intimacy of it, this stranger knowing her innermost thoughts, was overwhelming. Please, sit, Elliot gestured to a small table where breakfast had been arranged. You must be hungry? Grace remained standing. I need to call the hospital. They'll be looking for me. Already handled, Elliot assured her. You've been granted personal leave, paid, of course. You can't just... I own the hospital, Grace. His voice was gentle but left no room for argument. I can do quite a lot. Grace felt a chill despite the warm morning. Power radiated from Elliot Carrington like heat from a furnace. When she didn't move toward the table, Elliot approached with careful steps. Let me make you some tea, at least. His movements were those of a man accustomed to giving orders, not serving others, yet he prepared the tea with surprising skill. Ceylon with honey, no milk, he said, offering her the cup. Your favorite. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it. Grace pulled back instinctively. Elliot smiled, noticing her reaction but saying nothing. How did you end up at St. Joseph's? She asked, sipping the perfectly prepared tea. A man of your position would normally be treated at a private facility. Elliot lowered himself into a chair, wincing slightly. A long story. One better told after you've eaten. Grace reluctantly sat across from him. The food looked delicious, fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, but her stomach was too knotted to eat. I appreciate what you did for me, Elliot said, watching her over his teacup. But I'd like you to stay another day, to rest, to let me thank you properly. I need to check on Lily. Of course. He nodded. But she's receiving the best care. Available now. The experimental treatment from Sweden that you mentioned, I've arranged for that as well. Grace's teacup clattered against its saucer. That treatment costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. A small price for the woman who saved my life. His intense blue eyes held hers. Please, Grace. Just one day. She should say no. She should demand to be taken back immediately. But the thought of Lily receiving that treatment, the one Grace had been saving for, working double shifts for. One day, she conceded. Elliot's smile was triumphant, but warm. Excellent. Perhaps later you'd like a tour of the grounds? Grace nodded absently, her attention caught by a painting on the far wall. It showed this very mansion, bathed in moonlight. But what made her breath catch was the figure in the background, a woman standing at the window, her face in profile. A woman with auburn hair and a slender build, remarkably similar to Grace herself. "That painting," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How old is it?" Elliot followed her gaze. "Oh, that? Family heirloom. Mid-19th century, I believe." "And the woman in the window?" His expression shifted, nearly imperceptible. "Just a figure the artist added, I suppose. For composition." Grace stared at the painting, at the woman who could have been her twin. "Curious coincidence, isn't it?" Elliot said, but something in his tone suggested it was anything but. "I think I'll accept that tour now," Grace said, turning away from the painting. She needed time to observe Elliot, to understand what was really happening here. The morning sun had given way to a golden afternoon as Elliot led her through the sprawling estate. He walked with a slight limp, the lingering effect of his time in the hospital. "The gardens were my mother's passion," he explained, as they strolled along stone paths bordered by meticulously maintained roses. "After she died, I made sure they stayed exactly as she left them." Grace noticed how the staff watched Elliot, with respect certainly, but something else too. Caution, perhaps. "Tell me about your accident," she said as they rested on a bench overlooking the ocean. Elliot's expression darkened. "A car crash. At least, that's what it was meant to look like." "Meant to?" The brake lines were cut. His voice was matter-of-fact, as though discussing the weather rather than an attempt on his life. "I managed to steer into a ditch instead. Over the cliff. Lucky, I suppose." Grace studied his profile. "And that's how you ended up in a coma?" "Yes," he answered too quickly. "Head trauma. A lie." Grace had read his chart. The coma had been induced medically, not from trauma. "You're leaving something out," she pressed. Elliot's jaw tightened. "There are details I'd rather not discuss with someone I've only just met." "Someone you've only just met," Grace repeated with a hollow laugh. "Yet you've heard my most intimate thoughts for months." His expression softened. "You're right. Forgive me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, the touch lingering longer than necessary. "It's been a long time since I've had to trust anyone." As the day mellowed into evening, Grace found herself drawn into Elliot's world despite her reservations. After dinner in a dining room that could have seated 30, he led her to a smaller, more intimate room with a grand piano at its center. "Do you play?" she asked. Instead of answering, Elliot sat at the bench and began a haunting melody that filled the room with melancholy beauty. Grace moved closer, drawn by the unexpected vulnerability in his performance. This was not the calculated charm he had displayed earlier. This was raw emotion translated into music. "Chopin," she said when he finished. "Nocturne in E-flat major." Elliot looked up, surprised. "You know it?" "My father taught piano before. He died." She sat beside him on the bench. "It was his favorite. Mine, too." Elliot's shoulder pressed against hers, warm and solid. For hours they talked by the piano. Elliot spoke of growing up wealthy but lonely, of a father who saw him only as an heir, not a son. Grace shared stories of raising Lily after their parents died, of sacrificing her dreams of medical school to care for her sister. "You gave up everything for her," Elliot said, his fingers absently playing soft chords. "Not everything," Grace countered. "I have my work, my patience, but no one to care for you." His hand stopped playing, moved to cover hers. "No one to put you first." The air between them changed, charged with something Grace hadn't felt in years. Elliot leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. His eyes asked a question she wasn't sure she wanted to answer. His face was inches from hers now. She could feel his breath, count his eyelashes. For a moment, she wanted to close the distance, to let herself be wanted, to be the center of someone's world. But reality crashed back. This wasn't real. This was a fantasy crafted by a powerful man used to getting what he desired. "This isn't real," she whispered, echoing her thoughts, and pulled away. Elliot didn't pursue, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, certainly, but also respect. "I should get some rest," Grace said, standing. "Of course." Elliot rose too, maintaining a careful distance now. "Maurice will show you to your room." The elderly butler appeared as if summoned by thought alone. As he led Grace through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors, she noticed him watching her with curious eyes. "The master seems quite taken with you," Maurice observed as they climbed. "A sweeping staircase. We've only just met," Grace replied. Maurice's weathered face creased with a small smile. "Yet he looks at you as if he's known you forever." He hesitated at the top of the stairs, lowering his voice. "Be careful, Miss Whitmore. He doesn't always tell the truth." Before Grace could ask what he meant, Maurice continued walking, leaving her to follow with an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. Her assigned room was gorgeous. A four-poster bed, antique vanity, and French doors leading to a private balcony. After Morris left, Grace explored the space, running her fingers over leather-bound books and delicate ornaments. On the bedside table sat a small digital device she hadn't noticed earlier. A voice recorder with a handwritten label. Her voice. "Week 3. Grace's fingers trembled as she pressed play. "My life had been a complete blank." Her own voice emerged from the speaker, reading from Wuthering Heights. "My ties to existence were broken." She listened as her recorded self continued reading, then transitioned to speaking directly to the comatose Elliot, sharing worries about Lily's declining health, about the crushing medical bills, about her own loneliness. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," her recorded voice said with a tearful laugh. "Maybe because you're the only one who can't walk away when things get too heavy." Grace shut off the recorder, heart pounding. Not just her reading sessions, but her private thoughts, all captured, all saved, all listened to by the man downstairs. The question wasn't how Elliot knew so much about her. The question was why he wanted to. Grace's finger hovered over the play button again. She shouldn't listen more. It felt like violating her own privacy somehow. But she pressed it anyway. "I had a dream about you last night," her recorded voice continued, softer now. "You were standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean. You turned to me and said something, but I couldn't hear you over the waves." A pause, then her voice breaking slightly. "I think that's what scares me most about life sometimes. All the things left unsaid." The recording captured a shaky breath, the sound of pages turning. Anyway, back to Wuthering Heights. Where were we? Oh yes. "Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same." Grace flinched at those words in her own voice. Had she chosen that passage unconsciously? Had she felt something for this stranger even then? The door opened without warning. Elliot stood in the threshold, his expression unreadable as he saw the recorder in her hand. "You weren't meant to find that," he said quietly. Grace set the device down. "Were there cameras too? Or just audio surveillance?" Elliot stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The recordings were for medical monitoring, standard protocol for coma patients. "In a public hospital where you were registered under a false name?" Grace stood, anger replacing her initial shock. "There's nothing standard protocol about any of this." He moved closer. "I can explain." "Then explain why my private conversations were recorded. Explain why you've been listening to them. Explain why—" "Because they kept me alive." Elliot's voice rose, then immediately softened. "Your voice, your stories. When everything was darkness, you were there." He sank onto the edge of the bed. "I'm not proud of it. The recordings were initially installed for security reasons. But then what? He looked up at her, vulnerability replacing his usual confidence. Then I became dependent on them, on you. Your daily visits became my lifeline. Grace crossed her arms, keeping distance between them. That doesn't give you the right to... I know. Elliot ran a hand through his dark hair. I know it was wrong. But lying there, unable to move, unable to speak, your voice was the only thing that made me want to keep fighting. He rose suddenly, crossing to where she stood. Grace backed up until she felt the wall behind her. Elliot dropped to his knees, before her, his hands finding her waist, his forehead pressing against her stomach in a gesture so intimate it stole her breath. You made me want to live again, he whispered against the fabric of her shirt. The weight of his head against her, the warmth of his hands at her waist. Grace felt her resolve wavering. For a moment she allowed her fingers to thread through his hair, feeling its silky texture. Then reality reasserted itself. She stepped, sideways, away from his touch. This isn't healthy, she said firmly. Whatever this is between us, it's built on an imbalance. You know everything about me. I know nothing about you. Elliot remained kneeling, looking up at her with those piercing blue eyes. Ask me anything. I'll tell you everything. Why was your identity concealed at the hospital? Why John Doe? He stood slowly. Protection, until I could determine who was behind what happened to me. And the recordings? Started as security, became something else. At least he had the decency to look ashamed. Grace moved to the window, needing space to think. Something wasn't adding up. Her nursing instincts, honed over 20 years, were screaming that she was missing crucial information. I need to make a call, she said, pulling out her cell phone. Elliot tensed. To whom? My colleague at the hospital. I want to check on Lily. A flicker of relief crossed his face. Of course, I'll give you privacy. The moment he left, Grace dialed not the hospital's main line, but the direct number for Meredith, her friend in records management. Mir, it's Grace. I need you to look something up for me, quietly. She kept her voice low. The John Doe in 306. I need to know when his patient file was created and who authorized it. She could hear Meredith typing. That's weird, her friend said after a moment. The file's been flagged, access restricted. Can you override it? Shouldn't. More typing. Okay, I'm in. Hold on, this is strange. According to this, the patient was admitted 3 months ago, but the initial intake form is dated 2 weeks ago. Grace's blood ran cold. What? And it gets weirder. The original admission record has been deleted from the system. Completely. Purged. Who authorized it? A pause. Authorization came from the board directly, but the system shows the request originated from a terminal in the ICU. Someone inside the hospital did this, Grace. Grace thanked her friend and hung up, mind racing. The John Doe, Elliot, had been in the hospital for 3 months, but his official record only began 2 weeks ago. Someone had gone to considerable lengths to erase his existence. When Elliot returned with tea, Grace was waiting by the door. What exactly happened the night you ended up in that hospital? She demanded. Elliot set down the tea tray carefully. I told you. A car accident. No. The truth this time. His face hardened, then softened with resignation. You've been investigating. Answer. The question. Elliot gestured to a chair. When Grace remained standing, he sighed. It wasn't just my brake lines that were cut. I was poisoned. Thallium. Slow-acting, nearly untraceable. Grace's nurse's mind processed this. Thallium poisoning. Gradual, debilitating, often fatal if untreated. The symptoms would mimic many natural illnesses. By whom? My brother, Andrew. Elliot's voice was flat. He's been trying to take control of Carrington Healthcare for years. I had proof he was embezzling funds, siphoning money from our charitable foundation. I confronted him. And then I started getting sick. First subtly, fatigue, hair loss, nerve pain. By the time I realized what was happening, it was nearly too late. Elliot paced the room. The car accident was just his backup plan when the poison wasn't working fast enough. Why St. Joseph's? Why not a private hospital? Because it was the last place Andrew would look. I needed to disappear while my team gathered evidence against him. Elliot approached her slowly. I used a false identity to protect myself, and later, to protect you. Me. If Andrew discovered I was alive, he'd eliminate anyone who helped me. His expression darkened, including the nurse who sat with me every night. Grace processed this. It explained the secrecy, the false identity, the restricted records. But the recordings? Elliot looked away. Those were not part of the plan. My security team installed them as a precaution. But I should have had them removed once I regained consciousness. He met her eyes again. I became attached to your voice, to you. Grace felt the weight of his confession, the vulnerability beneath the power, the fear beneath the control. Yet something still felt off, a puzzle piece not quite fitting. You should have told me the truth from the beginning, she said. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was delusional, paranoid? Elliot moved closer. I needed you to see me, the real me, before I shared this. His hand reached for hers, but Grace's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced down at the screen. From Meredith. Your patient file has been flagged. Someone's asking questions about missing records. Admin called security. What have you done? Grace looked up at Elliot, whose expression had gone carefully blank. What is it? He asked. Someone knows I've been looking into your case, she said. And they're not happy about it. Who would report this? Grace asked, clutching her phone. The only people who know I'm looking into your case are you and Meredith. Elliot's face darkened. My brother has people everywhere. If they've discovered I'm alive. He crossed to the window, scanning the grounds below. We need to move you somewhere safe. I'm not going anywhere until I get the full truth, Grace insisted. No more half answers, Elliot. He turned to face her, shoulders sagging slightly. You're right. You deserve everything. He gestured to a small sitting area. Please. Grace sat cautiously, keeping distance between them. The poisoning started 6 months ago, Elliot began. Small doses in my evening scotch. I thought I was just overworked. Headaches, insomnia, hair thinning. Classic thallium symptoms, though I didn't know it then. How did you discover it? Was your brother? I overheard him on the phone discussing accelerating the timeline after I announced an audit of our foundation finances. Elliot's jaw tightened. The next morning, my coffee tasted metallic. I had it tested privately. And the car accident? When the poison wasn't working fast enough, Andrew arranged for my car to be tampered with on the way to our family estate in the mountains. Elliot's voice was clinical, detached. The brake lines were cut, but I managed to steer into a ditch instead of over the cliff edge. The impact was still severe. Grace's medical mind filled in the gaps. You would have been taken to the nearest trauma center, which would have been Carrington Memorial, where Andrew is chairman of the board. Elliot's smile was grim. I was conscious enough to give the paramedics a false name and insurance card my security team had prepared for such emergencies. You planned for your own attempted murder. In my position, you planned for everything. He looked tired suddenly. the weight of constant vigilance evident in the lines around his eyes. I was taken to St. Joseph's instead. When complications from the thallium poisoning sent me into respiratory distress, the doctors induced the coma, and your security team arranged the private room, the restricted access. Elliot nodded. They also began gathering evidence against Andrew, financial records, phone logs, soil samples from my estate showing thallium traces. His eyes met hers. We needed time, and I needed to disappear until we had enough to destroy him completely. Grace processed this information, checking it against what she had observed during her months of caring for him. The pieces fit, but not perfectly. Why wake up now? Why reveal yourself when you're still gathering evidence? Something shifted in Elliot's expression. Because some things became more important than revenge. His voice softened. Because I couldn't bear to keep lying to you. For the first time since this began, Grace felt she was seeing the real Elliot Carrington. Not the powerful businessman, not the manipulative patient, but a man caught between vulnerability and strength. "Show me," she said suddenly. "Show you." "What?" "The poisoning. There would be physical evidence." Elliot hesitated, then stood. Slowly, he unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a lean torso marked by a large surgical scar across his abdomen, and smaller ones where chest tubes would have been placed. But what caught Grace's attention were the distinctive lines on his skin, darkened, streaks across his torso like macabre tiger stripes. "Me's lines," she said softly, moving closer to examine them. Transverse white bands across the fingernails and skin discoloration. Classic thallium poisoning indicators. Grace's fingers traced the scar running from his sternum to below his navel. The touch was professional at first, the nurse and her assessing the healing, but as her fingers lingered, something changed in the air between them. They had to repair. "Internal damage from both the crash and the poison," Elliot explained, his voice rough. Grace looked up, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Her hand was still on his bare skin, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath. "Was I just another piece in your strategy?" she whispered. "Just a convenient nurse who happened to care?" Elliot caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his chest. "You were the unexpected variable," he said, his voice low and intense. "The one thing I didn't plan for." The room seemed to shrink around them, the space between their bodies charged with something Grace had been trying to deny since she woke in this strange mansion. Elliot's hands rose to cradle her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with exquisite gentleness. "I had every detail planned," he murmured, drawing her closer. "Every contingency accounted for, and then there was you." Grace knew she should pull away. This was too fast, too complicated, built on a foundation of half-truths and manipulations. Yet when Elliot's lips finally met hers, the kiss was nothing like she'd expected, not calculated or controlling, but achingly tender. His hands trembled slightly against her skin, betraying the emotion he'd kept so carefully contained. Grace found herself responding, her arms sliding around his neck, her body pressing closer to his warmth. The kiss deepened. Years of Grace's loneliness and Elliot's isolation dissolving in the space between heartbeats. For a moment, nothing existed beyond this room, this man, this unexpected connection forged in the strangest of circumstances. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Elliot pressed his forehead against hers. His eyes remained closed, as if he feared what he might see in her gaze. "This," he whispered, his voice unsteady, "was never part of the plan." Grace stepped back slightly, needing distance to clear her head. The rational part of her mind was screaming warnings, but her heart, her lonely, overworked heart, was pulling her in a different direction entirely. Before she could respond, a sharp knock came at the door. Maurice entered without waiting for a response, his usually composed face tense with urgency. "Sir, we have a situation." The elderly butler's eyes flickered briefly to Elliot's still unbuttoned shirt, then back to his face. Security has detected unauthorized access to the property perimeter. Elliot's expression hardened instantly. How many? 3 vehicles approaching from the South Road. Activate Protocol Ember. Elliot turned to Grace. All vulnerability vanished behind a mask of control. Pack whatever you need. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Grace's phone chimed with another text. She glanced down, expecting more from Meredith, but instead saw an unfamiliar number. Ms. Whitmore, this is Patricia Dowling, head administrator at St. Joseph's. Your unauthorized access of confidential patient records is a serious violation of hospital policy. Security has been instructed to detain you upon your return. Please contact me immediately to explain your actions regarding the missing John Doe file. Grace looked up at Elliot, who had already begun making calls, his voice clipped and authoritative as he issued commands to unseen security personnel. The comfortable mansion had transformed into a fortress under siege, and the man she'd just kissed was once again the stranger she'd met only yesterday, controlled, commanding, calculating. But the taste of him still lingered on her lips, and the memory of his words, "This was never part of the plan," echoed in her mind. The question now was whether she was being rescued or captured, and whether the difference even mattered anymore. "We have 3 minutes," Elliot said, his voice steady as he finished buttoning his shirt. "My helicopter is waiting on the east lawn." Grace stood frozen, the administrator's text still glowing on her screen. "I can't just disappear. My career, my reputation. Your safety comes first." Elliot moved to a wall panel, pressed a hidden switch, and revealed a small safe. He extracted a file folder and tucked it inside his jacket. "Andrew, won't stop with me. Anyone who knows the truth is at risk." "What about Lily?" The thought of her sister jolted Grace into motion. "If your brother is targeting people close to you, already handled." Elliot handed her a small duffel bag. "She's being transferred to our Swiss facility under an alias. She'll be safer there, and the treatment options are better." Maurice appeared at the doorway. "Sir, they've breached the main gate." Elliot nodded grimly. "Take the tunnels. East exit." He turned to Grace. "It's time." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Hidden passages behind bookshelves, dimly lit stone tunnels, the distant sound of voices shouting. Grace's nurse's instincts took over. Stay calm. Follow protocol. Ask questions later. They emerged into a clearing where an unmarked helicopter waited, blades already turning. "Get in!" Elliot shouted over the noise, helping her climb aboard. As they lifted into the air, Grace caught a glimpse of dark vehicles, converging on the mansion below. Men in suits spilled out, not police but private security, moving with military precision. "Your brother's men?" she asked. Elliot nodded, his face grim as he watched through the window. "He'll find nothing. All evidence is either with us or already with the FBI. The FBI, you've been working with them for months. The evidence we gathered shows Andrew wasn't just embezzling from our foundation. He was using our hospitals to distribute counterfeit medications." Elliot's jaw tightened. "People died, Grace." The helicopter banked sharply east, heading over. "The ocean." "Where are we going?" Grace asked. "Safe house in the Outer Banks, just until the FBI makes their move." Elliot took her hand. "After that, you'll be free to go back to your life. I've arranged for all records of your investigation to be expunged. Your job will be waiting." Grace studied his face. "And what about you?" "I'll rebuild what my brother tried to destroy." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But I'll do it differently this time." The intimacy of the gesture stirred something in Grace's chest. "And us? What happens to whatever this is between us?" Elliot's eyes held hers. "That depends on you. On me. I've manipulated enough situations in my life, Grace. I won't manipulate this." He released her hand. "When this is over, when you're safe and back in your world. If you want to explore what we started, I'll be waiting. If not..." His voice roughened slightly. "I'll understand." The helicopter touched down on a small landing pad beside a modest beach house. No mansion this time, just a simple structure facing the sea. Inside, Elliot made a series of calls while Grace stood by the windows, watching waves crash against the shore. The reality of her situation was sinking in. Her career possibly in jeopardy. Her sister being moved overseas. Her life completely upended in less than 48 hours. And yet beneath the chaos, something else had awakened. Something she'd thought long buried under years of responsibility and sacrifice. When Elliot finished his calls, he joined her at the window. "FBI is moving on Andrew tonight. It should be over by morning." "All of it?" Grace asked. "Or just the parts you planned?" Elliot considered her question. "Some things can't be planned, Grace. Some things just happen to us. Like falling for a patient. Like finding unexpected connection in the most unlikely of places." "I need to make a call," she said, "to check on Lily." Elliot handed her a secure satellite phone. "Use this. It can't be traced." Grace stepped onto the porch, breathing in the salt air as she dialed the number she knew by heart. The relief in hearing her sister's voice, excited about the Swiss clinic, about the new treatment options, loosened something in Grace's chest. When she returned inside, Elliot was packing a small bag. "You're leaving?" she asked, surprised. "Yes." He straightened, looking at her directly. "My presence puts you at risk until Andrew is in custody. There's a security team stationed nearby. You won't see them, but they're there. You'll be safe. And after, when it's over." Elliot approached her slowly. "After, I'll come find you, if that's what you want." Grace realized what he was doing, giving her space, giving her choice, stepping back from the control he'd exerted since she'd awoken in his mansion. The gesture meant more than any grand romantic declaration could have. "I should hate you," she said softly, "for the recordings, the manipulation, dragging me into your world." "You should," he agreed, a sad smile touching his lips. "But I don't." The admission surprised even her. "I've spent my life caring for others. First my parents, then Lily, then my patients. Always giving pieces of myself away." She moved closer to him. "But with you in that hospital room, I found something I'd lost. Even not knowing who you were, I felt seen." Elliot's hand rose to cup her cheek. "You were the first real thing in my life in a very long time." This time, it was Grace who closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. Not the desperate passion of their first kiss, but something deeper, more certain. When they parted, Elliot pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll come back for you. I promise." "I know," she whispered. He left as the sun was setting, the helicopter disappearing into the darkening sky. The months that followed were a gradual return to normalcy, or some new version of it. The FBI raid made headlines nationwide. Carrington Healthcare, heir arrested in counterfeit drug scheme. Grace watched the news coverage from the small apartment she'd returned to, wondering where Elliot was, if he was safe. True to his word, her position at St. Joseph's was restored. The investigation into her actions mysteriously dropped. Lily thrived in Switzerland, her treatments showing remarkable progress. Grace returned to her routines, to her patients, to the quiet life she'd built. But something had changed. She no longer felt invisible. She no longer read to the empty room when she got home. She was waiting, though she wouldn't admit it to herself. The small coastal clinic where she'd taken a part-time position offered a view of the ocean, gray and turbulent on this Sunday afternoon, matching the gathering storm clouds. Grace finished updating a patient chart, listening to the first drops of rain hitting the windows. The clinic was empty except for her, the weekend. shift quiet as most locals stayed home in the worsening weather. The sound of the door opening drew her attention. Probably Mrs. Hendricks forgetting her prescription again. The last person Grace expected to see standing in the doorway, raindrops clinging to his dark coat, was Elliot. "You're working on a Sunday," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered. Grace set down her pen. Some things don't change, and some things do. He stepped further into the clinic, stopping before her desk. "Andrew's trial ended yesterday, guilty on all counts. I saw the news. I promised I'd come find you when it was over." Elliot's eyes searched hers. "If you still wanted me to." Grace rose from her chair, moving around the desk until nothing separated them. "I've been waiting." His tentative smile bloomed into something brilliant. "I disappeared to protect you," he said softly. "But I came back to love you." Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows. But inside, as Elliot drew Grace into his arms, there was only warmth and the certainty of finding something neither had expected to discover. They stood together by the window, the ocean crashing beyond, and when Elliot's lips found hers, Grace felt the last pieces of her heart lock into place. His arms encircled her waist, her hands wove into his hair, and the kiss deepened with the promise of everything that waited beyond this moment. When they finally broke apart, the storm had quieted, and slivers of sunlight pierced the clouds, touching the water with gold. "What happens now?" Grace asked. Elliot smiled, taking her hand in his. "Now we write our own story. No recordings, no monitors, no secrets." Grace rested her head against his shoulder, watching the sea calm outside the window. All those nights reading to a silent, patient, all those whispered confidences she thought no one would hear. They had brought her here, to this moment, to this man. In the end, it wasn't the silence that saved us. It was the courage to speak.